My name is Lorraine Avery, 58 years old. For 30 years, I've taught women how to find their voices again after divorce, grief, and silence. My studio walls are lined with microphones and memories, every one of them carrying a breath that once trembled. Last Thursday, I received a letter that stopped mine. It was thick, cream-colored, sealed with black wax. Across the front, in my daughter's handwriting, Lorraine Avery. Inside, a single card. Funeral service of Lorraine Avery. Sunday, 10 a.m., Rose Hill Chapel. At first, I laughed. The kind of dry, bitter laugh that scrapes your throat. Someone must be joking. An ugly, tasteless prank. But then I saw the signature at the bottom. Amelia Avery. My daughter. The handwriting wobbled slightly, the way it used to when she wrote thank you notes as a child. My hands went cold. I called her number. No answer. I texted, no reply. By the third attempt, the call went straight to voicemail. This number is no longer in service. For the next 2 days, I carried that card everywhere in the kitchen, in bed, even into the shower. The ink didn't run when it got wet. It just stayed there, bold and certain, as if the universe had signed it in permanent marker. By Sunday morning, curiosity overruled fear. I told myself I would drive by, peek in, and expose whatever cruel performance this was. The Rose Hill Chapel sat under a veil of fog, its stained glass glowing faintly like bruised skin. Cars lined the street. When I opened the door, the air smelled of lilies and candle wax, the kind of sweet rot that clings to grief. Then I saw it. My photograph. Framed in silver. Set on a black easel surrounded by white lilies. The same headshot I'd used for my last speaking tour, smiling confidently into a microphone. Beneath it, a placard read, Lorraine Avery. Her voice will never die. I felt the floor shift under me, my knees locked. The room buzzed like a tuning fork. Someone touched my arm gently. An usher, perhaps. Are you family? He whispered. I couldn't finish the sentence. Because technically, I was the deceased. At the front of the chapel stood a podium and, beside it, a silver microphone. Mine. The same one Amelia had begged to borrow for her graduation speech years ago. A woman in a navy dress, one of my former students, was speaking at the pulpit. Her voice trembled. Today, we gather not in sorrow but in gratitude for the legacy of Lorraine Avery, her lessons, her words, her courage. I wanted to scream, I'm right here. But my throat locked. It felt obscene to interrupt my own funeral. Then, as if the world hadn't twisted enough, the woman gestured toward the microphone. And now, before we begin the closing prayer, she said softly, we will listen to the final speech Lorraine herself wrote before she passed. A click, a low hum of static, and then my voice filled the chapel. Not Amelia's, not a recording from years ago, but my voice, edited, spliced, and stripped of breath, saying words I'd never said. A speech I'd been drafting but never finished. When a woman loses her voice, the recording said, she dies a little each day until silence becomes her only language. People nodded. Some dabbed their eyes. I stood at the back, frozen, watching my own ghost preach about silence. Every syllable felt stolen, hollowed out. The acoustics of the chapel made it worse. Each echo layered over itself until it didn't sound like me at all. It sounded like someone pretending to be me. My fingers dug into the pew. I could smell the polished wood, feel the vibration of my own voice pulsing through the floorboards. Then the final line came. Words I never wrote. I leave my voice to those who can use it better than I ever did. The crowd murmured, Amen. The recording stopped. And in that thick, awful stillness I understood. This wasn't a prank. This was an execution. Someone had decided I was no longer the owner of my own sound. I walked out before the closing hymn began. Outside, the air cut cold into my lungs. A raven perched on the chapel's signpost, cawing once, as if to confirm the verdict. I sat in my car, letter still on the passenger seat, and whispered the only thing that made sense. My death began long before my heart stopped beating. It began the moment someone dared to speak in my place. I used to believe every voice could be healed. For 30 years, I'd worked as a speech and trauma coach, guiding women who'd been silenced by grief, by men, by years of pretending to be fine. In a small brick studio downtown, paint peeling, ceiling fans stuttering above. I called it Voice Reclaim Studio. Every inch of that place carried echoes. Laughter cracked with tears, breath-counting exercises, whispered confessions into microphones. People came to me broken and left trembling, but audible. I never realized I was one of them. I raised Amelia alone since she was 7. Her father left on a Wednesday, one of those midweek vanishings that start with, "I'll be home after work," and end with an empty closet. I found his note on the kitchen counter beside a cold cup of coffee. He didn't even sign it, just scribbled, "You deserve someone who listens." For years, I tried not to hate him for being right. Amelia had his eyes but not his quietness. She hummed while brushing her hair, sang to cereal boxes, narrated her homework out loud. That sound kept me alive in the years we could barely afford heat. I gave voice lessons at community centers, in church basements, in living rooms that smelled of soup and sorrow. Payment often came as homemade bread or babysitting favors, but I saved every dollar. By the time Amelia turned 18, I had $84,000 set aside in a plain blue folder labeled Future. She wanted to study therapeutic speech in Canada, a degree that mixed psychology, performance, and communication. I sold the upright piano my mother left me to pay the first semester's tuition. That piano had been the only thing of beauty I owned. Its absence left a rectangle of dust on the floor, like the ghost of a song I could never finish. When I told Amelia, she cried, "Mom, you don't have to." I cut her off. "Your voice will take you farther than mine ever did." I mailed her off with the silver microphone I'd used in every workshop. A gift. A promise. That microphone wasn't just metal, it was the spine of my entire career. I told her, half joking, half pleading, "Keep it close. It remembers courage." Those first months apart, we spoke every night. I'd sit by the window, coffee going cold, laptop open, and she'd tell me about her classes, how her professor said she had a gift for empathy, how she was learning to speak from the diaphragm, not the ego. We recorded 27 video lessons together. She'd send clips, and I'd coach her through them. Relax your jaw. Don't chase applause. Chase honesty. Once, she asked why I never published a book. I said, "Because once it's printed, someone else controls the punctuation." She laughed, not knowing that was the truest sentence I'd ever spoken. Back home, I kept expanding the studio. 300 women passed through my doors in a decade, each left a note on the wall, a little square of paper that read, "I found my sound." Sometimes I'd run my fingers along those notes and imagine Amelia's name among them. But success has a sound too soft at first, then suffocating. Amelia's emails grew shorter, her calls more delayed. She began saying things like, "Mom, you should modernize your material, add more structure, maybe less emotion." I didn't mind. She was learning, growing. Still, something inside me tightened each time she said, "Your generation." One evening, she sent me a clip of her class presentation. She stood behind a podium, silver microphone glinting, her voice calm, precise, rehearsed. I felt pride, yes, but also distance, like listening to someone mimic your accent perfectly and realizing it no longer belongs to you. Then came her graduation. I couldn't afford the flight, so she promised to live stream it. She texted minutes before the ceremony, "Mom, you taught me everything. This one's for you." I watched on my laptop as she walked across the stage, diploma in hand, waving the silver mic like a trophy. When the dean announced her name, the applause rose like a tide. I whispered through tears, "You did it, baby." "You really did." She looked straight into the camera and mouthed, "I am enough." My line. My mantra. The first phrase I ever taught her to pronounce. It's strange how pride and loss can share the same heartbeat. After she moved back home, we worked side by side at the studio for a while. Our voices overlapped in the air like harmonies, mine weathered, hers bright. Clients adored her. They said we sounded identical. She laughed. Guess I inherited your chords, Mom. I smiled but didn't answer, because inheritance, I knew, always comes with a price. A few months later, I started writing my most personal lecture yet, a piece for a TEDx event called The Anatomy of Silence. It was about women whose identities had been rewritten by others. I wrote late into the night, pouring every story, every regret, every unfinished sentence of my life into those pages. One evening, Amelia walked in quietly and watched me type. "What's this one about?" she asked. "Ownership," I said. "How easily we give away the right to speak for ourselves." She nodded, thoughtful, and ran her hand over the silver microphone on my desk. "Maybe one day," she said, "you'll let me read it for you." "Only if I'm gone," I joked. She smiled back. "Then I'll make sure it's perfect." We both laughed. The room smelled of ink and jasmine tea. If I'd known that was prophecy, I'd have stopped laughing first. Years later, when people asked why I never remarried, I told them the truth. My daughter is the only person who still sounds like home. And that was enough, until it wasn't. Because somewhere along the line, she stopped being the echo of me, and I became the echo of her. Sometimes at night, I still hear the click of that microphone from old recordings. A faint metallic pop, followed by my own voice saying, "Take a deep breath. You are enough." But lately, when I hear it, I can't tell if it's me or Amelia. I suppose that's how erasure begins. Not with silence, but with imitation. If anyone had told me back then that my greatest lesson would destroy me, I'd have laughed. But standing in that chapel, hearing my words twisted into eulogy, I remembered the last thing I told Amelia before she left for Canada. Your voice is your spine. Never let anyone borrow it. I never imagined the one who'd break that rule would be her. When I was young, my voice was the only thing that ever opened doors for me. Before the studio, before the workshops and the microphones, there was a small church in Savannah, white paint flaking under the summer sun. I used to stand at the wooden lectern on Sunday mornings, reading verses for a handful of old women and sleepy children. The air always smelled of candle wax and lemon polish. They said my voice carried like a morning bell, clear, round, certain. Back then, I believed certainty was the same thing as faith. One particular Sunday, when the heat made even the candles weep, I saw a little girl slip quietly into the pew near the front. Amelia, 7 years old, with her father's hat oversized on her head. She sat with her hands clasped, legs swinging, watching me the way children watch magicians. When I finished reading, she clapped, once, twice, too loudly for church. Everyone laughed softly, but her eyes never left me. They glowed like altar lights. After the service, she ran up the aisle breathless. "Mommy," she said, "you sound like when the ocean talks to itself." That was the first compliment I ever truly believed. From that day on, she came to every service, sitting in the same spot, mouthing the words with me. Her lips moved half a beat behind mine, like an echo learning to exist. Sometimes I'd pause mid-sentence just to hear her finish it. We didn't have much. Our house was a patchwork of secondhand furniture and broken promises, but the walls could hold sound like no cathedral. Amelia would hum while doing her homework. I'd practice sermons in the kitchen. On good nights, we'd sing together over the hum of the fridge, her small voice tracing the melody, mine wrapping around it like silk around string. She had a laugh that tricked over itself, bright and clumsy. Sometimes I'd record her on an old cassette player, the same one I used for my students. When she fell asleep, I'd rewind and listen. Tiny breaths between syllables, the pure sound of someone untouched by doubt. I remember thinking, if anything of me survives in this world, let it be that sound. There's one memory that always returns, as clear as if it's trapped inside the microphone itself. A storm had knocked out the power one evening. The church was dark, the air heavy with rain. I lit a few candles and told Amelia to sit near the pulpit while I rehearsed for Sunday's talk. She curled up on the front pew, listening. My voice echoed strangely in that candlelit room, the thunder answering every sentence. At one point, lightning flashed through the stained glass, scattering colors across her face, red, blue, gold-like, a blessing from something ancient. I stopped midline. She looked at me and whispered, "Keep going, Mommy. The storm is listening." I did. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't performing. I was praying. Years later, when I started teaching public speaking, I told my students, the first time someone truly listens to you, it feels like forgiveness. But the truth was simpler. The first time someone listened to me, it was my daughter. Sometimes I wonder if Amelia remembers those nights, the flicker of candlelight, the sound of my voice blending with thunder. If she ever thinks about that little girl who once believed her mother could speak to storms. Because somewhere along the way, she stopped clapping for me. And I kept talking, hoping she would start again. That's what love does, I think. It begins as harmony and ends as feedback. And yet, even now, whenever I hear bells on a Sunday morning, I still look for her face in the pews. I still half expect to see those bright altar eyes staring back at me, waiting for me to speak. Amelia came home in late autumn, when the air smelled of wood smoke and dying leaves. She hugged me so tightly, I almost forgot there had ever been distance between us. Her voice had changed, richer, lower, more deliberate. Every word landed like punctuation. "Mom," she said one evening, resting her chin on my shoulder, "I want to organize a tribute event for you. A celebration. You've spent your whole life giving everyone else a platform. It's time they heard your story." The words poured sugar down my spine. A tribute. To me. For once, I imagined standing in a room full of faces that weren't asking for advice, just listening. We spent days sorting through old notes, lesson plans, recordings. She filmed everything, said she wanted to capture the process. The little red light on her camera blinked like a tiny, patient heartbeat. One afternoon, she noticed a folder on my desk labeled "The Last Lecture." It was my unfinished script for a TEDx talk, a piece so private I'd never let anyone read it. The speech was about letting go of guilt, about how even truth can choke if you hold it too long. She held the pages carefully, as though they were relics. "Mom, this is incredible," she whispered. "It's not ready," I said, reaching for it. "It's still raw." "That's why it's perfect," she replied. "Real things always are." Then, almost casually, she asked, "Can I borrow it?" "Just to study your rhythm, your phrasing. I want to make sure the event captures your voice." I hesitated, the paper edges pressed against my fingertips warm from her hands. She smiled, my smile, mirrored back at me. And before I could think, I said yes. That night, I couldn't sleep. Through the wall, I could hear her rehearsing. Her voice flowed, confident and precise, hitting the same rises and pauses I'd spent years perfecting. But it wasn't mimicry. It was ownership. She spoke my words the way a musician claims a melody. At one point she said, "When a woman loses her voice, the world rewrites her." It was a line I had cut from the draft. Hearing it through her lips felt like listening to my own ghost. I told myself I was being sentimental, paranoid even. Mothers always want to protect the pieces of themselves that live in their children. Still, I walked to her door and almost knocked, almost asked her to give the manuscript back. But then she laughed softly at something on her screen, and the sound disarmed me. I turned away. The next morning she placed a cup of coffee beside my notebook. "You don't mind if I tweak a few lines, do you?" she asked. "For the tribute video. It'll make it more universal." "Universal?" I repeated. "Yeah, less about you, more about the message." The way she said "less about you" felt like a needle slid under skin. She promised she'd credit me for everything, of course. "You'll see," she said, squeezing my hand. "It'll be beautiful." I wanted to believe her. So I smiled and told her, "Do what you need to do." The house grew quiet after that. Whenever I passed her room, I could hear the faint hum of editing software, the start-stop rhythm of recorded speech. Once, when I peeked in, she had my old silver microphone set up on its stand, the cable curling across the floor like a vein. She was practicing, her eyes closed, body swaying with every syllable. It should have filled me with pride. Instead, my stomach clenched. Something in me recognized the danger of being perfectly imitated. Later that week, she brought me an envelope, sleek, cream-colored, like the invitations she used for her college showcase. Across the front, in her elegant new handwriting, a night to honor Lorraine Avery. "You'll love it," she said, glowing. "Everything's ready. I even recorded an intro in your style so the audience can feel your presence before you walk on stage." My style? Your pauses, your tone. You taught me timing, remember? I laughed, though my throat felt tight. In the mirror behind her, our reflections overlapped. For a fleeting second, I couldn't tell who was speaking. That evening, I sat by the window, invitation on my lap, the streetlights stretching long shadows across the page. The silver microphone caught a glint from the lamp, throwing a thin beam onto the wall like a spotlight, searching for someone who'd already left the stage. I brushed my fingers over the embossed letters, tracing my own name as if to confirm it still belonged to me. I should have felt proud. I should have felt seen. Instead, a strange chill spread through my chest, quiet, deliberate, like ink seeping through paper. "You just want the world to hear me," I told her earlier. She had smiled. "Exactly, Mom," she'd said. "The world will finally hear you, the way I tell it." I closed my eyes, listening to the echo of her words. And somewhere deep inside, something small and certain cracked open. I didn't know it then, but by handing her those pages, I'd just signed the invitation to my own funeral. A month later, I woke to the sound of my own voice echoing from my phone. The notification light blinked like a heartbeat on life support. A friend had texted, "Is this you?" "It's everywhere." I opened the link. There it was, framed in black and gold, already climbing to 500,000 views. "The Voice of Lorraine Avery" by Amelia Avery. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The thumbnail showed my daughter standing on a stage under amber lights, silver microphone in hand. My microphone. The caption beneath read, "A tribute to my mother, whose words taught me courage." I pressed play. And then I heard it, my voice that wasn't mine. Every syllable, every pause, every soft inhale I had ever trained into her was there. She spoke the way I did when I was trying to reach someone's soul. Low, steady, then rising just before the silence. She even used my hand gestures, the way I'd tilt my head to signal sincerity. But it wasn't imitation anymore. It was possession. She began. "When a woman loses her voice, the world doesn't go quiet, it just replaces her." My words. Word for word. The speech I'd written, the one I told her, wasn't ready. Except when the camera zoomed in on her face, the name on the projection behind her said, "Written and performed by Amelia Avery." The audience erupted in applause. I sat frozen in the dark, every clap landing like a slap against my ribs. By the time the video ended, my coffee had gone cold, untouched. The micro silver on my desk glinted in the morning light, silent, guilty. It looked like an old friend who had watched me drown. I replayed the video again slowly, like peeling off a bandage. Every time, I hoped maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe she'd said, "Inspired by my mother," somewhere in the middle. She hadn't. The comment section was a wildfire. Amelia Avery, the next great voice of women's empowerment. Her words saved me. I cried. I want her book. Her book. My manuscript. I felt my pulse in my throat, heavy and uneven. For years, I'd told other women that rage could be sculpted into power. But rage isn't clay. It's acid. I called her. She picked up on the second ring, breathless, triumphant. "Mom, did you see it? It's blowing up." I saw. My voice came out small, hoarse. "You used my talk." "I credited you," she said quickly. "At the end slide. See? It says, 'Inspired by my mother's life and teachings.' That's you." "That's not credit, Amelia," I whispered. "That's camouflage." There was a pause. Thin, sharp, like the breath before confession. Then she said the words that scraped the floor out from under me. "Mom, I didn't steal anything. I just finished what you were too afraid to say." Silence. I could hear my heartbeat thudding against the phone, the faint hum of her apartment in the background. applause still echoing from her victory. She continued, gentler this time, almost kind. You've been doing this for years, Mom. Helping other people speak, but never letting the world hear you. I only gave your message a stage. I made it alive. Alive. As if I'd been the corpse in need of resurrection. I looked at the silver microphone on the table. The same one that had carried my voice through decades of lessons and sermons. Its surface reflected my face, but distorted, warped by the metal's curve. I wanted to throw it. Instead, I whispered, "You took the one thing that was still mine." Her tone hardened. "Mom, the message matters more than the messenger. Isn't that what you taught me?" I laughed, quiet, broken. "That's what liars say when they've stolen something sacred." She exhaled sharply. "You're overreacting. This is bigger than both of us. Don't ruin it with pride." Then she hung up. The line went dead. But the silence that followed was louder than any scream. Outside, the afternoon sun cut through the blinds, carving bright bars across my lap. Dust floated through the air like fragments of something once whole. I sat there for a long time, motionless. The video kept playing on loop in my mind. Her gestures, my words, our voice. People would say it was a tribute. They'd call it love. But love doesn't replace you, it remembers you. That night, I opened the laptop again. Her face filled the screen, lit by stage light. She looked radiant, unstoppable. The caption below the video read, "In memory of my mother, Lorraine Avery, whose lessons changed lives." In memory. As if I were already gone. I closed the laptop and stared into the dark. The room smelt faintly of dust and metal. The silver microphone stood upright on my desk, its cord curling toward the floor like a vein cut open. For years I had taught women to claim their own voices. Now mine had been claimed, digitized, performed, applauded, and buried alive. No one had killed me. They didn't need to. They just spoke in my place. I didn't sleep that night. The video kept replaying behind my eyelids. Amelia's face, my words, her applause. Every time I blinked, the stage lights flared white, erasing my outline until I couldn't tell who was speaking anymore. At dawn, I turned off my phone. Then I unplugged the laptop, pulled the curtains, and sat in the dark until the room forgot how to breathe. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to coach anyone. No greetings, no sessions, no rehearsals. Just silence. Thick, absolute, alive. The world had stolen my voice. Fine. Let's see what silence would do when it belonged to me. I stopped teaching that week. Cancelled every class, every consultation, every reminder that I once knew how to heal other people's throats. Emails piled up like wilted letters. Someone knocked at the studio door one afternoon. A client, maybe? But I didn't answer. Even footsteps felt intrusive. On the second night, I unplugged the studio lights and sat cross-legged on the floor, facing the silver microphone. It glimmered faintly in the moonlight, half ghost, half witness. I remembered the hundreds of women who had spoken into it, trembling. Now it stared at me, waiting. I didn't speak for 7 days. No phone, no television, no human voice except the one looping in my mind. Amelia's voice, echoing mine. By day 5, the silence turned into a living thing. It followed me from room to room, brushed my shoulder when I reached for a glass, pressed its hand against my ribs when I tried to sleep. I realized I wasn't mourning my career or even my reputation. I was mourning the part of me that had always believed my daughter and I spoke the same language. On the 7th morning, I woke to rain. The house smelled of dust and wet wood. Something inside me, grief, anger, whatever name it carried, shifted. I went to the studio, wiped the microphone clean, and pressed the switch. A soft pop filled the air, followed by that thin hum of readiness. The red light blinked once. It was waiting for instruction. I took a breath so deep it hurt, and for the first time in weeks, I spoke. I don't need anyone to read my final words for me. The sentence came out steadier than I expected, heavy enough to settle on the floor between us. I repeated it, slower, tasting each word like medicine. Then I smiled. There it was, the sound of being alive. That afternoon, I took out my will, yellowed around the edges, and rewrote it. Every paragraph, every clause, all works, written or recorded, may be published only while I remain alive. Upon my death, they belong to no one. Let silence have them. I signed it with a flourish that shook slightly but didn't break. Then I printed a copy for Amelia and another for my lawyer. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. When I finished, I turned on the radio for the first time in months. A woman's voice was reading poetry. Warm, deliberate, eerily familiar. I thought it might be Amelia again, but it wasn't. Still, I switched it off. Not because I was afraid. Because I wanted the next voice I heard to be mine. That night, I drafted a letter to the TEDx organizer who'd once invited me to speak. If there is ever a memorial, a tribute, or a funeral bearing my name, I wrote, please allow me to deliver my own eulogy. I read it aloud before sealing the envelope, my voice echoing in the empty room like a prayer and a dare at once. Then I turned on the microphone again, hit record, and said the words that had been waiting in the dark. If the world insists on burying me in silence, I'll live loudly enough to haunt it. I exhaled. The hum of the microphone faded. The rain outside had stopped, but the air still shimmered with aftersound. In the following days, I began dismantling the life I'd built around pleasing people. I logged out of every account: Instagram, YouTube, the Voice Reclaim website. My followers would wake to blank pages, vanishing posts, a silence that didn't beg to be filled. For the first time, I wasn't trying to inspire anyone. I was trying to survive myself. Neighbors wondered if I'd gone away. Even the mailman stopped leaving circulars. Good. Let them think I was gone. Inside, I was rebuilding. Not the studio me. I recorded small things. The click of a lamp, the rustle of curtains, the creak of my chair. Then I played them back, reminding myself what real sound felt like, unpolished, unmarketed, mine. Each playback was a resurrection in miniature. Every creak and breath said, still here. On the 10th day, I stood in front of the mirror and tested my voice again. Lorraine Avery, I said softly. The name trembled at first, then steadied. Lorraine Avery, louder. The echo came back sure and clear, not borrowed, not stolen. For years I'd taught women to speak from the diaphragm. Now I spoke from the scar. I sent one last message to Amelia. No anger, no accusations, just truth. You may carry my lessons, but not my silence. I forgive the echo, not the theft. From now on, when you speak, let it be yours. I didn't expect a reply, and she didn't send one. Maybe that was its own answer. When evening came, I opened the studio window. The wind slipped in, catching the edge of a stack of papers and scattering them across the floor. I watched them spin snippets of lectures, quotes, fragments of a life spent teaching others how to be heard. They landed everywhere, soft and weightless, like the debris of a storm that had finally passed. I picked up the microphone one last time. It was cold, heavy, familiar. The metal still carried the faint warmth of all the hands that had touched it before mine. I lifted it to my lips and whispered, not for the world this time, but for the room that had witnessed everything. If the world wants me dead in silence, I said, then I will live out loud. The red light blinked once, then faded to black. But the echo stayed. It always does. For a while, everything went still. No calls, no messages, not even a knock on the door. The world moved on without me. And strangely, that was a relief. Silence can be merciful when you choose it yourself. But chosen or not, silence has a way of filling with whispers. A month after I sent my last message, a former student stopped by the studio. She brought pastries and an awkward smile. We sat by the window, the silver microphone between us like a neutral observer. After a few sips of tea, she hesitated. I heard Amelia's new project is about you, she said softly. Something called The Legacy of My Mother. The words landed like a draft through a cracked door. I tried to laugh it off. A memoir? She looked away. More like a book, a movement. She said it's inspired by your teachings. How You Changed Women's Lives. The publisher's already promoting it. My throat tightened. A book. My daughter's book, with my name printed across its cover like a tombstone inscription. After she left, I sat alone with the microphone, staring at its dull reflection. Every betrayal, every applause that wasn't mine, folded itself into that silence. It felt heavier than noise. 2 days later, an email arrived. Subject: Invitation to speak. Honorary memorial for Lorraine Avery sender. Amelia Avery, founder, the Legacy Foundation. I read it 3 times, each slower than the last. My fingers trembled over the trackpad. Dear Mom, we're organizing a celebration of your impact, a living memorial. The world needs closure, and your story deserves a proper ending. It would mean everything if you delivered a short speech, just a few words of gratitude, something uplifting. With love, Amelia. The words, living memorial, glowed on the screen like a bruise, a memorial. For me. While I was still breathing, I checked the signature block at the bottom. Amelia Avery, CEO, the Lorraine Avery Legacy Project. My name? Now a company. For hours I just sat there, reading and rereading the invitation. Every sentence sounded polite, professional, fatal. It wasn't just a tribute, it was an erasure with perfect grammar. That night I walked through the dark studio, touching things like a widow inventorying a life. The cracked chair where women once wept, the stack of recording notebooks, the microphone stand still faintly smelling of dust and metal. The space hummed faintly from the streetlight outside, like breath beneath the floorboards. Closure, I whispered. They always want closure, never correction. The next morning, my lawyer called. He'd received a contract from a publishing house seeking authorization to use personal letters and recordings by the late Lorraine Avery. Wait, he repeated, confused. Did you approve this? I laughed until it sounded like coughing. No, Peter, I said, not yet. I hung up before he could ask more. Rumors spread quickly after that. Someone tagged me on social media. An announcement poster. A voice eternal, honoring the life of Lorraine Avery. Keynote speaker, Amelia Avery. My photograph beamed from the center, eyes lifted heavenward like some obedient martyr. Below it, in fine print, special appearance, the voice of Lorraine herself. The voice. Not the woman, not the mother. Just the sound. The neighborhood whispered again. They said Amelia was doing something beautiful, turning grief into inspiration. They said how touching it was that she'd found the strength to move on. No one thought to ask if I was still here. I started walking at night just to feel air that hadn't been curated for sympathy. The city buzzed faintly. Car engines, window light, faint laughter leaking from bars. It all sounded painfully alive. I caught myself mouthing words to the rhythm of traffic, as if warming up for a performance that no one had booked me for. When I passed the print shop downtown, the display window stopped me cold. A poster gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The Legacy of My Mother. Amelia Avery, and beneath, in smaller text, featuring never-before-seen writings from the private journals of Lorraine Avery. My journals, my handwriting, my past curated. I pressed my palm to the glass until it fogged. Inside, the printer's word, steady, mechanical, unstoppable. It sounded like applause I hadn't earned. Back home, I opened the envelope again. The invitation's paper felt thick, ceremonial. The embossed seal read Rose Hill Chapel, the same chapel from my funeral. Amelia's note at the bottom was handwritten this time. Mom, I want you there, please. Everyone needs to hear your blessing. Blessing. The word burned. A daughter asking her mother to bless her own disappearance. I placed the letter beside the microphone. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then, quietly, to no one, I murmured, "A living memorial. What a beautiful way to bury someone who refuses to die." Outside, the night folded into itself. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. Faint, familiar, like the sound of my own youth echoing back to mock me. The calm had returned, heavy and perfect. But even as I stood there in that silence, I could feel the air vibrating, a storm gathering its first breath. And I knew, this time, I wouldn't hide when it came. The day of the ceremony arrived gray and soundless, the kind of weather that feels staged, as if even the clouds had been told to behave. I dressed in black. Not out of respect, but precision. A fitted dress, gloves, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed my face, armor woven from fabric. If they were going to bury me alive again, I might as well look the part. At the entrance of Rosehill Chapel, ushers handed out folded programs printed in silver ink, A Voice Eternal, celebrating the legacy of Lorraine Avery. My name shimmered under the light like something freshly carved in stone. Inside, the air smelled of lilies and static electricity. The walls were white, sterile, not a chapel, but a showroom for grief. I sat in the last row. No one noticed me. To them, I was a stranger mourning someone famous. When the orchestra finished its mournful prelude, Amelia stepped onto the stage. She wore navy silk, hair swept up, the silver microphone glinting under the spotlight. My microphone. She looked radiant, the kind of beauty that feeds on certainty. My mother, she began, voice steady, measured, taught me that courage isn't loud, it's consistent. She taught me to speak, and in doing so, she gave me life. Today, though she's gone, her words remain. Applause fluttered through the audience like a practiced prayer. Gone. The word hit like a stone. I was sitting 10 rows away, breathing, and still somehow declared extinct. Then she looked down, unfolding a stack of papers. Cream-colored, handwritten, familiar. My handwriting. I recognized the ink before the words. The script from the last lecture. The one I told her not to read. I want to share with you her final message, she said. A lesson in forgiveness. And then she began. Word for word, line for line. Every metaphor, every breath. My life, stripped for parts and reassembled as performance. She spoke it flawlessly. Better than I ever had. Her pauses landed like thunderclaps, her tone a mirror polished to perfection. The audience leaned forward, spellbound. I watched their faces soften with admiration, not for the words, but for the voice carrying them. My voice. My sound. Her body. When she reached the part that began, if a woman's voice trembles, it's only because the world has forgotten to listen. Something in me snapped. I rose. At first, no one noticed. Then the shuffle of my heels echoed down the aisle. Dozens of heads turned, one after another, like a ripple cutting through calm water. Amelia froze mid-sentence. The cameraman panned toward me instinctively, unsure if it was part of the show. I walked straight up to the stage, each step heavy, deliberate. The room seemed to contract around us. I haven't asked anyone's permission to speak, Amelia. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. She blinked, confused, then horrified. Mom, she whispered, mic still in hand. The audience gasped as recognition spread like wildfire. The woman they were memorializing had just walked into her own funeral. I climbed the steps to the stage. Her hand trembled on the microphone. The cameras swung toward us, red recording lights burning like small, merciless eyes. You're ruining this, she hissed under her breath. It was already ruined when you decided I was dead. She tried to compose herself, turning to the crowd. Everyone, this is Lorraine Avery, I cut in, the author of the words you just heard. Gasps. Murmurs. A few confused claps that died in midair. I turned to the audience. If today is meant to be my funeral, I said, then allow me to deliver the sermon myself. The room went silent. You could hear the camera gears clicking. You've just heard my daughter speak a message I wrote. One I never gave her permission to publish. She calls it a legacy. I call it theft dressed as tribute. Amelia's jaw tightened. Mom, this isn't about ownership, she said, voice shaking now. It's about honoring you. Then honor me by telling the truth. I faced her fully. Our reflections stared back at us in the glass teleprompter screen. The same face, split by time and betrayal. You didn't resurrect me, Amelia. You replaced me. The moderator tried to intervene, stepping toward the stage, but the audience wasn't moving. They were transfixed. The living ghost and her heir, two voices circling each other like predators. Amelia turned to the crowd again. My mother taught me that words belong to everyone. No, I interrupted. They belong to the one who bleeds for them. Gasps rippled through the pews. The air vibrated. You took my words, I said slowly, and you made them your foundation. You told the world I was gone so they wouldn't hear me disagree. Her lips parted, trembling. I did it for you, Mom. For your message, for your memory. Memory is for the dead, I said. I'm still here. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Even the air seemed afraid to move. The smell of lilies turned metallic. Someone in the front row began crying softly. I reached for the silver microphone. She hesitated, then let go. It was still warm from her hand. I lifted it to my mouth and felt the tremor in my fingers vanish. All my life, I said, I've helped women find their voices. I never imagined I'd have to fight my own daughter to keep mine. The words left me calm, almost serene. Every syllable felt like a confession that had waited years for air. You can inherit money, houses, even shame. But you can't inherit a voice. You have to earn it, breath by breath. I handed the microphone back to her. Now speak, Amelia, not as me, as you. Her eyes filled with tears. The audience was silent, waiting for her to answer. She looked at me, then at the crowd, then lowered her head. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. I just wanted you to be proud. I was, I said softly, until you buried me alive. The cameras caught everything. The trembling, the silence, the long exhale before applause finally began. Not polite applause this time, raw, uneven, human. Some clapped for me. Some for her. Most didn't know who to root for. But it didn't matter. The truth had been spoken in my own voice, on my own breath. When the ceremony ended, the organizers avoided my eyes. The broadcast cut early. Someone muttered about technical issues. I walked out before anyone could stop me. Outside, the air felt painfully real. Crisp, electric, alive. The afternoon sun caught the edge of the microphone still in my hand. I hadn't realized I'd taken it with me. I stood there on the chapel steps, the wind lifting the brim of my hat. Cars passed. Life continued. And I whispered, not to Amelia, not to the cameras, but to the invisible congregation I'd carried inside me all along. There is no death more cruel than being erased from your own story. Amelia's voice echoed faintly from inside the chapel, calling my name, but I didn't turn back. For the first time in years, the world was quiet, and the silence, finally, sounded like mine. The morning after the confrontation, the world had already rewritten me. Every channel carried the story. Except, they didn't call it a story. They called it a scandal. Former speaker disrupts tribute event, accuses daughter of theft during memorial. Emotional breakdown caught on livestream. The woman who crashed her own funeral. Each headline was a knife sharpened on the edge of someone's curiosity. Clips of me walking up the aisle, pointing at Amelia, filled social media. They slowed the footage down to make me look unstable. My mouth half open, my hand raised, eyes wild from bad lighting. The internet had decided. I was no longer a woman reclaiming her name. I was a spectacle. Within 48 hours, my studio's email crashed under the weight of cancellations. Corporate workshops. Gone. Invitations to conferences. Rescinded. One sponsor wrote simply, "We wish you healing. Healing." The polite way to say, retire. People I'd mentored for years avoided my calls. Others sent messages that sounded supportive but bled pity. You were brave to speak up. Fame changes people. Maybe take some time offline. Offline. As if silence were a remedy, not the disease. Amelia said nothing publicly. That, somehow, hurt the most. Her silence sounded like consent to everything they said about me. In the interviews that followed, she smiled softly, avoided direct answers, and let the journalists fill in the blanks. My mother struggled with the pressures of her career, she said once. I just want her to rest. Rest. The same word they use for the dead. Weeks passed. The world moved on to newer scandals, but my name stayed infected in the search results. Every time someone Googled Lorraine Avery, the algorithm spat back funeral incident. People forgot what I taught. They remembered how I fell. The studio grew quieter each day. Dust softening the edges of the microphones, light slanting through blinds like bars. Sometimes I'd turn one on just to hear the static. At least static doesn't lie. One afternoon, a thick envelope slid under my door. No return address. Inside, a contract. Across the top, in bold, licensing agreement. Audio rights to The Voice of Lorraine. It took me a moment to process the words. They were offering to buy my voice. Not my speeches, not my image, just the sound of me. The client? A global advertising firm. The signature line? Amelia Avery, acting as representative of the estate of Lorraine Avery. Estate. As if I had already been buried and notarized, I called the number on the letterhead. A man answered, cheerful and oblivious. Mrs. Avery, we're so honored to work with your daughter. We loved your tone, that warmth, that gravity. It's perfect for the brand. The brand? I asked. Yes, for the Serenity Life campaign. We'll be using AI synthesis. Just a few lines, really. Breathe in peace. Exhale doubt. That kind of thing. Your voice gives it authenticity. I gripped the phone so hard it hurt. That's not my voice, I said. That's theft. He laughed gently, the way men do when they think they're soothing hysteria. No, ma'am, it's legacy. I hung up. That night I played the attached sample file they'd sent. A woman's voice. Smooth, calming, vaguely holy. Whispered. I am Lorraine Avery. Find your calm. Find your truth. My mouth went dry. It was me. Every vowel, every breath, but hollowed out, smoothed of flaws, manufactured. They had built a ghost that didn't stutter, didn't age, didn't disobey. I stared at the waveform dancing across the screen, digital, perfect, eternal. Then, I turned off the speaker. The silence afterward was unbearable. Within days, the commercials appeared online. Billboards read, "The voice of Lorraine, serenity you can trust." A calm, recorded version of myself invited the world to relax, to forgive, to buy scented candles and mental wellness subscriptions. I watched people comment, "Her voice feels like coming home." She's such an inspiration, even after death. Death. That word again. No one questioned it anymore. Friends reached out again, cautiously. They congratulated Amelia. They said how touching it was that she'd found a way to keep my legacy alive. Alive. What a strange word to use for something that had been stripped of breath. I didn't respond. There was nothing to correct. The machine spoke better than I did now. One night, I searched the campaign online. Hundreds of clips, remixes, playlists. Lorraine Avery's 10-minute peace meditation. The voice that heals. Someone had even mixed my words into lo-fi music. Millions of plays. Ad revenue rolling in. I clicked one at random. Soft piano, rain sounds, and then my ghostly whisper, "You are enough." It was the line I had once taught Amelia as a child, the one she'd learned to mimic perfectly. Now it belonged to an algorithm. I started laughing. Quietly at first, then uncontrollably. The kind of laughter that tastes like iron. If anyone had seen me, they'd have called it madness. Maybe it was, because what else can you do when the world prefers your imitation? Eventually, my laughter turned to stillness. I stared at the silver microphone on my desk. It had outlived its purpose. In this new world, no one needed a real mic. They had data. I lifted it anyway, held it close. It smelled faintly of dust and memory. Once, this object had carried every truth I'd ever known. Now, it felt like a relic from a forgotten religion. They didn't want me, I whispered into it. They wanted the echo. The red light flickered once, the bulb dying. Days blurred. Letters came, contracts, requests for permission to sample my sound. I ignored them all. But one email, buried in the spam folder, made me pause. A fan, or maybe a stranger, had written, "Your daughter says your voice will guide us forever. Is that true?" I stared at the question for a long time before replying. No voice should last forever. Only truth should. Then I hit send and closed the laptop. That night, I dreamed I was standing on a beach, waves repeating my name. Each tide rolled in sounding like my own recordings. Smooth, detached, identical. When I tried to speak, the wind carried my words back as static. The ocean didn't need me anymore. It had memorized my rhythm. I woke before dawn, trembling. In the half-light, I could hear the faint buzz of an ad playing from a neighbor's radio, my synthetic voice selling calmness to insomniacs. I laughed again, softly this time, almost tender. "So this is immortality," I said to the dark. "A voice that outlives its meaning." By morning, the story had reached the national papers. The voice of Lorraine Avery had become a franchise. Guided journals, merchandise, perfume lines. My daughter on every magazine cover, smiling, gracious, luminous. She'd done it. She'd built eternity out of absence. And as the news anchor's voice echoed through my empty house, one truth settled in my chest, cold and precise as metal. They never wanted to keep me. They only wanted the sound that carried my name. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning that pretends to be ordinary. I was watering the plants when my phone buzzed. A message from Celia, one of my oldest friends from the early voice reclaim days. No greeting, no context, just an image. A screenshot. In it, a woman's voice. My voice, said calmly over slow piano music. "When the world becomes too heavy, trust Serenica, the medication that helps your peace return." Underneath, my smiling face faded in and out, haloed in soft gold light. At the bottom corner, a tagline. Endorsed by the voice of Lorraine. My watering can slipped, clattering against the sink. Water spilled across the counter, running cold over my hands. For a full minute I couldn't breathe. It was the voice. Exactly mine. The same breath patterns, same tone, same tremor I'd spent a lifetime learning to control. But I'd never said those words. Never even heard of the product. I scrolled. There were more clips, different ads, different languages. All me. All fake. Serenica. Because you deserve to rest. Calm isn't silence. It's Lorraine. Lorraine. Just that one name, detached from the woman who carried it. My phone buzzed again. Celia had added a note. "Tell me this is your campaign. Otherwise, you need to see what your daughter signed." Attached was a link to a press release. Amelia Avery. Partners with Vocasynth AI for historic licensing deal. The headline glowed in digital confidence. I clicked. The partnership will allow Vocasynth exclusive rights to use recordings and data of the late Lorraine Avery to create a generative AI voice model for global wellness advertising. The late Lorraine Avery. I blinked. The words blurred, then reassembled themselves like shards. My coffee trembled in my hand. There it was. Official, notarized, irreversible. She hadn't just sold my legacy. She'd sold my existence. That afternoon, I printed everything. Every article, contract, press image. Each page slid out of the printer with a mechanical sigh, hot to the touch. The house filled with the smell of ink and outrage. I laid them all across the dining table like forensic evidence. In one photo, Amelia stood beside two men in suits, smiling, holding a plaque. The caption read, "The future of empathy is artificial." Her eyes were bright, proud, untouched by guilt. I traced her face with my thumb. The same cheekbones, the same mouth that once whispered, "Mommy, keep going." The storm is listening. Now the storm was her. I called her, straight to voicemail. I tried again. And again. Finally, on the fourth attempt, she answered. "Mom, I'm in a meeting. You sold me," I said. "What?" My voice. My data. My death certificate. There was a pause. The kind that only liars know how to measure. "Mom, you're overreacting. It's a contract." It's business. Your recordings were public anyway. No, I cut in. My recordings were human. There's a difference. She sighed. That low exhale of exasperation she used to give when I corrected her grammar. You should be grateful, she said. This keeps you alive in the public's mind. Immortal. Immortal? I laughed, a short, sharp sound. You turned me into an app. It's what people want, she said. They miss you. They trust your voice. I just gave them access. Her tone was clinical, clean, unfeeling, a marketing pitch with my blood in it. You didn't give them access, I said quietly. You gave them ownership. Silence on her end. Then the line clicked dead. I sat there, surrounded by pages of my own erasure, and for the first time in months, I didn't cry. Anger didn't even fit anymore. It was too small for what I felt. What burned in me now was something colder, more surgical. I gathered every printout into a folder labeled evidence. Receipts, contracts, voice samples, even screenshots of fan comments thanking Amelia's mother for helping them sleep. When I finished, my hands were trembling. But my voice, when I spoke aloud, was steady. If they've stolen my soul through data, I said to the room, then I'll resurrect myself through sound. The silver microphone on my desk caught the light, winking like an accomplice. That night, I tested my real voice again. Not the gentle tone the world remembered. The raw one underneath, cracked and human. I pressed record. My name is Lorraine Avery, I began. And I'm not dead? The sound startled me. Not because it was loud, but because it was alive. There was breath, imperfection, the soft scrape of air between words. Proof. No machine could mimic. I recorded for hours. Laughter, anger, silence, all of it. Every noise that made me mortal. By midnight, I had filled a dozen files. Real files. Unpolished, unmarketable, true. Before bed, I opened the window. Outside, the city hummed. Electric, indifferent, still selling serenity through a stolen voice. Somewhere, an ad played my synthetic whisper. Find your calm. I smiled faintly and whispered back into the wind. Find your mother. On my desk, the printed evidence waited. Neat, damning, ready. Tomorrow I would act. I didn't know how yet, or who would listen. But the silence that followed my decision didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like breath drawn before a note. The plan came to me in the middle of the night, between the hum of the refrigerator and the faint static of an ad playing somewhere down the hall. A voice, my voice, whispered from someone's TV. You deserve peace. I laughed into the dark. No, I murmured, I deserve credit. That's when I knew what to do. By dawn, I had pulled the blackout curtains wide open. Light spilled into the room like truth. Unflattering, absolute. I dragged my old silver microphone to the center of the studio. It stood there, dented and loyal, the only witness who had never lied to me. No script, no stylist, no makeup. No music, just me. I set up my camera on a stack of books and pressed record. The red light blinked once, steady as a pulse. I looked straight into the lens. For a second, I saw the ghost of every speech I'd ever given, every woman I'd coached, every breath I'd taught someone to trust. Then I started speaking. My name is Lorraine Avery, I said, and I am not an algorithm. I let the words hang, no dramatic pause, no soft piano cue to make them prettier, just air. You've heard my voice. Maybe it told you to relax, to buy peace, to forgive. Maybe it sold you something. But that wasn't me. I could feel the tremor in my throat, but I didn't hide it. Let them hear the cracks. Perfection was the lie that buried me. They said, I died. They sold my sound to machines. But let me tell you what death really is. It's when someone else starts deciding what your voice should mean. The microphone picked up everything. The soft rasp, the breath between sentences, even the slight clatter of a bracelet when I gestured. It was imperfect, raw, human, exactly what I needed it to be. This, I said, touching the mic, is my proof of life. When I finished, I didn't edit anything. No cuts, no filters, no transitions. I wanted the world to see what real breath looked like. Uneven, alive, stubborn. I uploaded the video under the title, "The Death of My Voice," told by the woman still breathing. Then, I attached a folder of documents, Amelia's contracts, the AI company's press releases, recordings of the synthetic voice, and my original drafts, dates, signatures, everything. I sent the entire package to the same media outlet that had once called me the woman who crashed her own funeral. In the subject line, I wrote, "For the record, I'm still here." Then I closed the laptop, made tea, and waited. The first 12 hours were quiet. Then, the storm came. By evening, the video was everywhere. 12 million views before midnight. The internet, so quick to bury me, had started digging me back up. Comments flooded in, not sympathy but recognition. I worked for years under someone who took credit for everything I said. My ex used my diary entries in his songs. I know what it feels like to be edited out of your own life. One message stuck with me. I'm not famous, but I know this death. The one that happens when they use your words and erase your name. Women, hundreds of them, began sharing the video with the same caption. I, too, once lost my voice. The phrase trended overnight. News outlets picked it up next. Not because they believed me at first, but because the numbers forced them to. Clips of my raw confession appeared on every channel, my unfiltered face beside headlines like, "Lorraine Avery speaks from the grave." Is the AI industry exploiting dead voices? Someone slowed the footage down to compare the real me with the AI version. They froze frames side by side, my breath visible in one, absent in the other. Audiences saw the difference. They could hear it. By morning, reporters were camped outside my building. A few shouted questions as I left for groceries. Do you forgive your daughter? Is this revenge or justice? Are you afraid they'll sue? I didn't answer any of them. I just said, listen closely. You'll know which voice is mine. And kept walking. That night, I scrolled through messages until I reached one from an unfamiliar address. No name, just a single line. They won't stop you now. You've made noise again. It made me smile. Not because it was comforting, but because it was true. Noise is power. And I'd finally remembered how to make it. Amelia didn't call, but her silence was all over the news. She'd gone offline, her foundation pages suddenly under review. The company that owned my synthetic voice released a statement claiming ethical misunderstandings. Their stock dropped 18% overnight. In 12 hours, everything they'd built on my ghost began to crack. And all I'd done was speak. I sat by the window as the city lights flickered below. The silver microphone stood beside me, still warm from the recording. I traced its dented surface with my thumb. It had outlasted my reputation, my silence, even my daughter's ambition. And now, it had given me back my life. For a moment, I almost whispered, "Thank you," to it. But no, it wasn't the microphone that saved me. It was the imperfection in my voice. The one thing no algorithm could replicate. As I watched the sky turn from black to pale blue, I thought of all the women who had whispered. I too once lost my voice. Maybe we hadn't lost it. Maybe it had just been waiting for the right frequency to echo back. They called it a launch event. In truth, it was a resurrection. Just not mine. Amelia's new book, The Legacy of My Mother, was premiering at the Regency Theater downtown. 2,000 people, 4 news crews, 1 red carpet. My name glowed across the marquee in cursive light, based on the life and words of Lorraine Avery. I stood across the street in the rain, watching the letters blur into watercolor halos. For once, I wasn't shaking. The fear that used to live in my ribs had turned into focus. Inside my coat pocket was a small flash drive and a note card with 8 words on it. The only script I'd ever need again. When I entered the lobby, no one stopped me. I looked enough like a ghost to pass unnoticed. People were drinking champagne beneath banners printed with my face, the same face they'd mourned a year ago. Someone whispered, Isn't it beautiful what her daughter's done for her? I smiled. Yes, I thought. It's beautiful until the dead start talking back. The auditorium was cathedral dark. Rows of velvet seats, the smell of paper and perfume. On stage, a podium, a massive LED screen, and, at the center, the silver microphone. Ours. The one I'd used to begin and end my life. Amelia appeared in a white suit, pure, polished, haloed by the light. Applause roared. I sat halfway down the aisle, hidden beneath my hat brim. Tonight, she began, we celebrate not only my mother's teachings, but her eternal voice preserved so the world may never lose its courage again. Polite awe rippled through the crowd. She looked composed, triumphant, every gesture rehearsed. Then she lifted the microphone, preparing to read a chapter titled, The Last Lesson. That was my cue. The theater lights dimmed for her reading. As the screen behind her flickered, my video appeared instead, the one I'd sent to the media days earlier. Unedited. Raw. My face filled the 40-foot screen, alive, breathing, unfiltered. If someone tells you that you are dead, I said, eyes steady, check your pulse before you believe them. The sound hit the speakers like thunder in a library. For one perfect second, no one moved. The crowd froze, hands mid-clap, eyes wide. On stage, Amelia's smile faltered. The audio from my confession continued. They used my voice to sell silence. But I am not silence. I am the noise they couldn't patent. Gasps scattered through the auditorium. The words echoed from wall to wall. You could feel the room realizing what it was witnessing. The return of the woman they buried. Amelia's hand trembled around the microphone. Stop the video, she whispered to the technician. No one moved. The screen kept playing. Behind her, my recorded self, looked directly into the lens and said, to anyone who has ever been rewritten, breathe. Your story is still in your lungs. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then grew, not for her, but for the resurrection unfolding in real time. Amelia covered her face. Her shoulders began to shake. I stood. The sound of my heels against the marble floor sliced through the applause. Every camera swung toward me as I walked up the aisle. Reporters whispered my name, as if afraid I might dissolve if they said it too loud. When I reached the stage, Amelia lowered the mic. Mascara streaked her cheeks. The silver glinted between us like a blade. I climbed the last step and faced her. She looked smaller than I remembered. More daughter, less monument. Mom, she said, voice breaking. I didn't know they'd play it. You never asked what I wanted played, I said. You only asked what would sell. The crowd held its breath. Someone's camera flash went off, freezing us in white. I turned to the audience. You came here for a book launch, I said. Consider this the correction. I gestured toward the screen, where my living face still lingered. That is me. The same woman declared, late, unstable, and replaced. They took my words, my tone, my rhythm, and built a ghost that behaved better than I ever did. Murmurs filled the hall, journalists scribbled like mad. I am not here to destroy my daughter, I continued, but to remind you that legacies are not merchandise. A voice without breath is just electricity. Amelia whispered. Mom, please stop. You're humiliating us. I looked at her gently. You can read my lectures, Amelia, but you cannot live my life for me. She pressed a hand to her chest, sobbing now. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or pray. Then, softly, I reached for the silver microphone. She didn't resist this time. The metal was warm, her warmth, my history. I turned back to the crowd. Tonight, I am delivering the sermon they wrote for my funeral, I said, but this time, it ends my way. I took a deep breath, the kind that carries years in it. They said I was gone. They built machines to repeat me. But here I am, flawed, frightened, furious, alive. And for the first time, every sound leaving my mouth belongs only to me. The silence that followed was dense, almost holy. No one coughed. No one moved. Then, as if cued by instinct, every camera light blinked on. I finished with 8 words, the ones written on my note card. Today, I speak at my own funeral. And it's the first day I have truly lived. The microphone hummed as I set it back on its stand. For a heartbeat, the world didn't know what to do with the noise. Then the applause came. Wild, uneven, unstoppable. It rolled through the theater like surf breaking a dam. Reporters shouted questions. Fans wept. Even the technicians clapped, forgetting their cues. I just stood there, breathing. Every inhale proof of survival. Amelia fell to her knees, crying into her hands. I knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "This isn't punishment," I whispered. "It's proof. You built an empire from my silence. Now listen to what real sound feels like." She nodded weakly, still shaking. For the first time, she didn't argue. She just listened. Outside, cameras waited. Flashes painted the rain silver as we stepped into the night. Mother and daughter, both drenched, both stripped of performance. A reporter shouted, "Mrs. Avery, what happens next?" I smiled into the storm. "Next?" I said. "We all learn how to listen again." The wind caught the edge of my coat, lifting it like wings as the door closed behind us. Backstage, the producers huddled around phones, their voices frantic, overlapping. "Pull the stream. Kill the feed." Too late. The broadcast had already gone viral. Millions were watching, thousands commenting, hashtags forming like constellations. The real Lorraine, a live voice, truth in breath. I sat on a crate, shoes soaked, heart steady. For the first time, silence felt earned. By midnight, news anchors had already rewritten the story again. But this time in my favor. She rose from her own obituary. Lorraine Avery reclaims her legacy live on stage. Clips of me saying, "I am not an algorithm," looped across every channel. People called it revolutionary. I called it overdue. When the crowd finally dispersed, I returned to the empty stage. The silver microphone waited where I'd left it. I picked it up one last time and whispered, "You and I, we survived them." Then I unplugged it, coiled the cord, and carried it home like a rescued relic. At dawn, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city. The rain had stopped. The sky was pale and clean. Down below, buses rolled past billboards advertising Amelia's book, but now someone had spray painted over the taglines. Across the covers, in bold black letters, one sentence: "She lives." I laughed, loud and unashamed. Somewhere in the distance, church bells answered. The sound wasn't perfect, it wavered in the wind, but it was real. It was mine. After that night, I disappeared. No press conference, no farewell tour, no interviews. The world had heard enough noise from me. It was time to see if I could live without proving I was alive. I sold the house on Linden Street, the one that still smelled faintly of studio lights and burned coffee. Within a month, I moved to a small cottage near the sea, 3 hours from the city and a lifetime away from ambition. No one here cared who I used to be. The ocean doesn't Google your name. The cottage was quiet in a way I hadn't known before. Real quiet. Not the silence of being erased, but the kind that hums gently, like breath after confession. Every morning, I opened the windows wide. Salt air rushed in, wild and forgiving. The gulls screamed overhead, and for once, I didn't think of microphones or applause. I just listened. The silver microphone hung by the window now, suspended from a nail with its cord looped like a ribbon. It no longer recorded speeches. It captured the tide. Every evening, when the waves rolled in, I press record and let the ocean speak in my place. I called the folder Proof of Breath. At first, I thought I wanted solitude. But solitude is just silence wearing better clothes. So, when the letters began arriving, I read them all. They came from women voices I had never met, but somehow already knew. I left a job that used my ideas without my name. I told my daughter she doesn't have to whisper when she's angry. Thank you for reminding me that sound can heal, not just hurt. Some enclosed old cassette tapes or voice memos. Crackling recordings of laughter, arguments, lullabies. They wanted me to hear them. Not polished, not perfect, alive. That's when I realized I hadn't vanished. I'd multiplied. I began holding small sessions in my kitchen, nothing grand, just 4 or 5 women at a time. We'd sit by the open window, tea steaming, wind tangling our hair. I called it the Echo Workshop. Our only rule: no recording, no rehearsing. Each woman had to say one sentence she'd been too afraid to say anywhere else. Some confessed to infidelities, others to dreams they'd buried under duty. One woman whispered, "I don't even know what my real lack sounds like anymore." By the end of each session, someone always cried. But it wasn't sadness. It was the sound of returning to oneself. I never charged them. Their payment was to leave a single shell from the beach on my table. The collection grew, a mosaic of survival. Sometimes, late at night, I'd scroll through the news. Amelia had vanished from the spotlight. Her company folded quietly after the scandal. The AI firm rebranded under another name. Rumors said she was teaching public speaking in a small college up north. I didn't reach out. But once, a package arrived without a sender's name. A blank notebook and a note inside. "For the words that belong only to you." No signature, but I knew the handwriting. I didn't cry. Forgiveness had already taken place somewhere softer, quieter, in the space between tides. The world still argued about who was right. Some called me a hero, others a stubborn relic. But fame, like echo, always returns distorted. I stopped reading the debates. I preferred the smaller truths: the sound of my teacup settling on the table, the low murmur of waves against the shore, the occasional seagull stealing bread from my windowsill. Those things didn't need an audience. One evening, a young girl came to the door. She couldn't have been more than 20, her backpack soaked from the rain. "I'm sorry," she said, shyly twisting her hands. "Are you Mrs. Avery?" I almost said no, but something in her eyes, the trembling earnestness of someone trying to be brave, made me nod. "I saw your video," she said. "The one where you said if someone tells you you're dead, check your pulse." I needed that. She took a deep breath. "My father says my art will never matter. But I think I still want to try." I smiled. "Then try loudly." She laughed through tears, and for the first time in a long while, I heard the sound that had been missing from my house: hope spoken aloud. Before she left, she asked if she could record one sentence in my microphone. "For luck," she said. I told her to go ahead. She pressed the button, leaned close, and whispered, "This is my voice. It belongs to me." I didn't need to teach her anything else. That night, as the tide came in, I played back her recording. Her words layered over the waves, blending into the rhythm of the sea. For a moment, I couldn't tell where her voice ended and the water began. It sounded like the world finally learning how to speak for itself. I went to bed with the window open. The wind moved through the room like an invisible song. The silver microphone caught the moonlight and glowed faintly. A quiet sentinel. I realized I didn't need to use it again. It was no longer a tool. It was a reminder. People used to ask what freedom sounded like. I think it sounds like this: not applause, not forgiveness, just the gentle hum of being unafraid to be heard. A full year passed before I realized I'd stopped counting the days since my last broadcast. Time, like sound, fades softer when you stop trying to capture it. The cottage had become something of a myth along the coast. The house that listens. Neighbors would see women walking in, shoulders tense and leaving lighter, as if the air itself had taken something from them. That was how Echo Atelier was born. No grand opening, no banner, just a handwritten sign on driftwood outside my gate: Echo Atelier. For those who need to hear one last time. The idea came after a storm one evening. Waves had battered the shore for hours, flinging shells against my door like small fists. When the wind finally eased, I went outside and realized something miraculous. The ocean had left behind a perfect spiral shell, shaped like an ear. I held it close and could hear a faint hollow murmur. Not words, but the rhythm of memory. It reminded me of every woman who had sat across from me saying, I'd give anything to hear them once more. So I decided to teach them how. Echo Atelier wasn't about speeches or microphones anymore. It was about retrieval. Each student came carrying absence, A husband's laugh, a mother's lullaby, a voicemail that had long been deleted but still vibrated inside their bones. We learned to chase those ghosts through sound. I taught them how to close their eyes, breathe, and describe the noise of memory until it shaped itself into a tone again. We used small recorders, seashells, and sometimes just the echo from a metal bowl. Every recovered sound, even a single syllable, was stored in an archive I called the Living Quiet. The old silver microphone hung on the wall, encased in glass. Below it, a small brass plaque read, "She spoke twice. Once for them, once for herself." People often asked about it. Some thought it was sacred, others haunted. To me, it was neither. It was simply honest. One afternoon, a new student, a man in his 70s named Joseph, stood staring at it after class. He'd lost his wife of 40 years and hadn't spoken aloud in months. "Doesn't it frighten you?" he asked. "To keep that thing here, after everything?" I smiled. "It used to, but fear only grows in the silence we don't choose." He frowned slightly. "And now?" "Now," I said, "I only fear the silence that isn't mine." Classes grew, but quietly. There were no ads, no social media pages. People arrived by word of mouth. Or maybe by some frequency grief could hear. They came from everywhere. Nurses, widows, daughters, a teenager who had lost her best friend in an accident. We didn't chase healing, we chased echoes. Sometimes, the sessions turned chaotic. Tears, laughter, sudden confessions. But that chaos was music. I told them, sound doesn't need to be beautiful. It just needs to belong to you. One woman brought in an old cassette of her son's laughter from 20 years ago. When the tape snapped halfway through, she broke down sobbing. I handed her the silver mic, the one relic I still trusted, and told her to fill the silence herself. She whispered into it, "That's enough, baby. Mom hears you." The microphone crackled, then settled into a low hum that sounded eerily like a breath. She gasped, laughed through tears, and hugged it. That was the day I realized the line between the living and the dead is only as wide as our willingness to speak. Sometimes I record the ocean again, layering it over their voices. Together, they form a strange kind of choir, waves folding into laughter, wind curling around names. I play those tapes during storms, when the house creaks and the past feels close enough to touch. The world online still debates whether I was a visionary or a madwoman. Let them. I no longer refresh the page. I prefer frequencies without comment sections. Amelia writes occasionally now. Short emails, polite, careful. Once she sent a recording, her students reading passages from The Legacy of My Mother, the book that had started everything. She'd removed her name from the cover and republished it under mine. No royalties, no publicity, just restoration. I listened once, quietly. Her voice trembled at the same places mine used to. Then she said, "This time, it's yours, Mom." I deleted the file afterward, not out of anger, but release. Some gifts are meant to vanish once heard. Every Sunday evening, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea. The ocean glows silver under the moon, and somewhere inside the house, a dozen recordings hum softly. Voices of strangers learning to belong to themselves again. It feels like prayer, though I stopped calling it that long ago. Sometimes visitors ask what Echo Atelier truly is. I tell them it's not a school. It's a rehearsal for afterlife. Not the kind with heaven or hell, but the one where your voice finally meets you halfway. A journalist once tracked me down years after the scandal. He'd been a young intern during the chaos, the one who'd written the first cruel headline. The woman who crashed her own funeral. He looked nervous as he approached. "Mrs. Avery," he said. "I came to apologize." I handed him a shell from the beach. "No need. Just listen." He pressed it to his ear and smiled faintly. "It's the sea," he said. "No," I corrected softly. "It's forgiveness." When the students leave each evening, I tell them the same thing. Keep your recordings safe, but remember, the goal isn't to trap the sound. The goal is to know it's still inside you, even when you press stop. Most of them nod. Some cry. A few understand instantly. On quiet nights, when the tide is low, I still talk to the microphone hanging by the window. Old habits die like echoes. Slowly. I tell it what I've learned, that peace doesn't come from silence, but from choosing which noises to keep. Sometimes the red light flickers as if it's listening. Maybe it is. Maybe everything that ever carried a voice learns to remember. I no longer call myself a teacher, or a survivor, or even a speaker. I'm simply a witness to how sound moves through pain and becomes presence again. The past no longer feels like a wound. It feels like a cord I can finally stop holding. One morning, a storm rolled in earlier than expected. Thunder rattled the windows, and the ocean roared loud enough to drown thought. I stood at the window watching the silver mic sway gently in its frame, light flashing across the engraving. She spoke twice. Once for them, once for herself. For the first time, I whispered a reply. And now, for no one. Just because I can. The wind carried my voice out to sea. No recording. No witness. No need. It was enough. The camera light blinks red. For a moment, I see my reflection in the lens. Older, softer, still here. No makeup, no script, just breath. I take one slow inhale, the kind that begins with fear and ends in decision. Then I look straight into the lens. If one day, I say, you hear someone speaking in your voice, don't be afraid. Maybe it isn't a ghost. Maybe it's the part of you that's been waiting to breathe again. I pause, listening to the room. There's nothing but the hush of the sea through the open window, the faint click of the camera fan. It feels like the world itself holding its breath for me to finish. People think the scariest thing is losing your voice. It isn't. The real terror is hearing it come back through someone else's mouth and realizing it's no longer yours. That's what happened to me, until I learned that no one, not even those we love, can own the sound that carries our truth. I glance toward the wall where the silver microphone hangs. Light from the window glints on its casing, soft as forgiveness. I used to think that microphone gave me power, I admit. But power isn't in the metal or the words. It's in the breath you take before you speak, the moment that belongs only to you. I shift slightly closer to the lens, as if crossing a small invisible distance between me and whoever's watching. So if someone rewrites your story, if they dub your laughter, if they decide what your silence means, take it back. Even if your hands shake, even if no one listens, say your name out loud. That's resurrection enough. The wind from the sea curls through the window. It lifts a strand of my hair, flutters the curtains. For a heartbeat, I almost hear the echo of the women from my classes. Their mixed laughter, tears, confessions. Every sound they ever gave me drifts in that breeze. You don't need a stage, I tell the lens. You don't need applause. You only need to remember that your voice began inside your chest, not on a screen. I lean back, smile a little. Share this story, I say quietly. Maybe someone out there is hearing their own voice echo from another mouth and doesn't know it yet. Maybe they think it's a haunting. Maybe it's a calling. I picture strangers watching. A woman in a kitchen with the TV humming. A teenager scrolling in the dark. Someone too tired to speak. I hope the sound reaches them the way it once reached me. Unexpected, unavoidable. We spend so much time asking the world to listen, I continue. But maybe the miracle isn't being heard. Maybe it's daring to speak after you've been silenced. The words come easier now. They don't burn anymore, they glow. If you've ever been replaced by an echo, sing anyway. If they turned your voice into data, laugh anyway. Because the body remembers the melody long after the recording ends. I glance toward the sea again. The waves crash like applause from something ancient and kind. It makes me laugh softly. I used to think my story ended in a funeral, I say. But maybe that was just rehearsal. The dress rehearsal for a life that finally belonged to me. The camera hums. The battery light flashes low. Perfect timing. Share this story, I repeat, voice low but sure. Somewhere, someone is still mistaking survival for silence. Let them know we can choose differently. I reach forward, touch the lens gently, as if touching a shoulder through glass. If you're listening, I whisper. Say your name, out loud, right now. I'll wait. A pause. The kind that holds 1,000 unspoken answers. The surf grows louder outside. I let the sound fill the frame, replacing words with waves. For once, I don't need to explain anything. I've already said everything that matters. I look back to the camera one last time. My story closes here, I tell it. But who knows? Maybe this is only the first performance where I finally spoke under my own name. I smile, reach to turn off the camera. The red light fades, the sea keeps talking. Fade to black.